This episode, we have special guest Natalie Larson, the Dean of Women intern at Calvary Chapel Bible College. Today, she's going to be talking about what living life as a Great Commission Christian looks like for her. So, Natalie, why don't you begin by talking a bit about your background?
Oh gosh, sorry.
Pretty crazy being on a podcast, isn't it?
No, this is just so silly to me. Not that it's a no, that's not what I'm meaning. It's just a sorry. Sorry. Okay, it's not funny. It's not funny. It's serious and important.
So, why don't you start off by talking about your background a bit?
Okay. Um I've been following the Lord for 3.5 years. Um about 6 to 8 months into my walk with the Lord, I came to Calvary Chapel Bible College and then quickly got involved leading worship at my church, along with serving at my school, which was required, but I really enjoyed. And then I graduated in spring of 2023 with my diploma in biblical studies. After that, I served at a Christian conference center in Austria for almost 3 months as the head of the dining department. So it was practical ministry, but very self sacrificial. There was a lot of me that needed to be given. And also, while I was there, the church that we were regularly going to, I got to lead worship in. And then I returned back to Calvary Chapel Bible College, not as a student, but as an intern for the student life department. So then I was the Dean of Women intern, which looks like leading and participating in weekly small groups, checking dorms, discipling the women on campus, specifically the dorm stewards, and sometimes enforcing the rules and disciplinary actions. But my main role was to be there for the women on campus, specifically the students. And I'm now finishing that up. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that when a lot of people look at things like checking dorms, doing disciplinary, it can seem very much like boring, busy work. But I mean, being the Dean of Women intern on campus, I mean, you're getting to be like a beacon of responsibility for these students. So even though you're just checking a dorm, like people are seeing you as someone who's enforcing the responsibility of good Christian stewardship, which is awesome. It's super cool. Can you tell me more about your time doing worship?
Okay. The first church I was leading worship at, I was a very new Christian, and they threw me in pretty quickly the second they found out that I sang in general. And you know, I enjoyed doing it. It taught me a lot about what it meant to use that as a ministry, when before, honestly, my view on it was just singing in front of a bunch of people. And I think that the ministry of worship, like specifically in song at church or really anywhere, got stewarded way better at the Bible college because I was leading worship there a lot more. And I was given a lot more direction there in the sense of like how it should be done, how we should honor the Lord in that, and steward it well as we're guiding the congregation into a place of worship in terms of like choosing songs and where our heart posture should be, and committing it to the Lord before and not leaning on talent or self, but leaning on what the Lord had given us and returning it back to Him as an act of worship. So
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me more about your time at Bible college. What was it like? How did you get to serve the students?
Like as a student?
Yeah, as a student, serving other fellow students or doing dorm stewarding or anything like that.
Okay, well, like I said earlier, it's not the case anymore, but for my first in 2 to 1.5 to 2 years of Bible college, we were put in a program called M199 where we were required for credit to serve one another, which was awesome and I think very beneficial. And, that was like the majority of me being a student, the way I served others. But then the last bit was me being a dorm steward. But for the first part, it was practical service. I was in the AV department for my first 2 semesters and then in the media department. Um, and it was fun work, but at the same time, like I would have to wake up early for the early morning classes and set things up and get things going. And I didn't necessarily enjoy that part, but I also really enjoyed like being able to sit in on the classes and talk to the students and get to do that. Um, and it was like we were trained to provide a resource for the students who maybe missed class, or a resource for the professors to be heard to the entire class, along with like during chapels we would do sound check and um, set up the stage, and it was a lot of fun. It taught me skills, and it was the beginning stage of me really learning like practical ministry rather than like what I thought was ministry, which was just the spiritual discipleship intense side of ministry. I guess the whole beginning of me being in Bible college, and even still now, like I was just learning what it even meant to follow the Lord and be involved in the body of Christ, and specifically in the local church. So when I became a dorm steward for my last semester as a student in Bible college, that's when it was no longer practical ministry, but it became more discipleship centered ministry. And I was in charge of 2 dorms, which was a little bit overwhelming because it was my first time. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but the Lord guided me there. And so I just trusted in Him. And it was a blessing. I loved it. It took up a lot of time where like I was meeting with someone new every single day because of how many girls I was stewarding. But it was a blessing. I loved getting to know them. I loved hearing about what's going on in their life, the good and the bad and the boring stuff. Like I loved being able to just be there, pray for them, to point them to the Lord, to just sit and listen to them, hear their testimonies. And in our dorm meetings on, I think it was Sunday nights at the time, just having all of us together, um, and having that sweet time of fellowship with a group of people that just wouldn't naturally hang out with each other because someone else chose who they were living with, and seeing them laugh together and cry together and pray for one another. It was a blessing to be able to steward that environment and also have personal relationships with each of them. So, yeah, it was definitely a blessing, and that really encouraged my desire to apply for the Dean of Women internship later on. So
Definitely. Tell me about your time in Austria. What was that like?
it was trying. It was difficult. It was my first time out of the country, and what I chose for my first time out of the country was to live there for almost 3 months, which I knew would be difficult. And yeah, that type of practical ministry was different than what I had done before, in the sense that it was 40 hours a week. I had a manager position, and I am managing, like, I think it was like 8 16 to 20-year-olds that were the majority of them not from this country, like America or Austria. And I had to schedule them and run all the shifts and make sure they were in proper uniform and had their hair tied back and weren't on their phones, and were serving the guests of many different cultures. And it was very trying. But in that time, like, I was separated from my home and even the comfort of being in my own country and my own culture. And I was given a pretty, like, big responsibility, because you're serving these people food. And that people take food fairly seriously, not just in America, but at least in other countries in Europe. I didn't have great community there because I had this like authority position. I think a lot of the people that I was serving alongside kind of saw me as a type of authority over them, and unfortunately I did have to do some disciplinary stuff there as well, because it was just a very adventurous group of young people, and they like to do adventurous things that unfortunately broke rules. So anyways, because of that, I didn't have great community, and the Lord became my community very quickly, which he had been before, but I think being in Austria, doing this practical ministry, not having great community, but feeling very overworked and overexerted all the time, my only refuge was in my room, in the Word and in prayer for hours every single day. And it was awesome. I remember I would call my dad every now and then, and I would tell him, like, I had never felt so close to the Lord in my life, like not even in Bible college, where I was studying his Word every single day, just spending time with him in his Word, but just being in his presence, and seeking him and knowing him and allowing him to have control over my emotions rather than me, because I absolutely would not have gotten through that summer without him there ministering to me on the level that I was ministered to by him. But it was a blessing. And through that, I was able to do some discipleship ministry. There were a few girls who just needed guidance. They had a lot of questions and never were given answers and weren't treated very well. And the Lord brought that information to me, and I was able to, steward their questions and their availability and their desire to be guided, and point them to the Lord and point them to Scripture rather than maybe what the internet is saying, or a bunch of different articles without true substance to them were saying. And so being able to do that, I feel like even prepared me for the next internship that I was stepping into immediately after, which was being the intern for the Dean of Women at the Bible College. So
tell me about that.
Okay. So that was a hard transition at first, because I did about 20 hours of travel from Austria to Italy to Georgia to California, and then I got to sleep one night in a bed, and then I woke up and I moved straight to the Bible college, completely jet lagged and very burnt out from the summer I'd had. No, the Lord definitely ministered to me so immensely in that summer, but I did feel very burnt out and worn down, mostly physically at that point. But I just jumped straight in, and I started that internship, planning the retreat where we kind of raise up the dorm stewards that are about to start that semester. And so I got to just get to know and pour into the dorm stewards that were coming in for that semester, and got to get to know my new, at the time, supervisor, Kayla Peterson. And get settled back into being in America. And yeah, it was, I don't know, I just loved it, but I was very tired. But then, over time, the Lord really just restored um, all of that, everything that I was, in every way that I felt worn down, like the Lord restored that for me, which was a blessing and so gracious of Him. But so that was the start of it. And then the students came, and, it was tempting to get overwhelmed and not want to do it anymore when you see all of the girls that you're potentially going to be, you feel this burden to protect them and to steward them and nurture them spiritually and I think that's what I felt right away, like when I'm meeting all of them at the front desk and hearing their names and trying to remember and seeing the rooms that they're going in and hearing their dorm stewards' hearts for them. It was a blessing, but it did feel overwhelming at first. And from there, the Lord really taught me to lean on Him in a new way rather than how I did in Austria with not having community and not feeling physically equipped or mentally equipped. I didn't feel like I was ready for the position I was going into. It just felt intimidating in a whole different way, especially spiritually. I had to learn that, like, this is a whole new arena of, like, surrender. I need to, like, give to the Lord, like, or I guess I just need to surrender it to the Lord, because there are many times in that where I would be meeting with a dorm steward and they would be in need of some sort of advice, whether it was relational or disciplinary or, if there was a conflict in their room. And sometimes I would give them advice just in my own knowledge and strength because I was like, oh, I got this. And I'd give it to them. And I think I spent probably a week or two doing that without realizing it. This was probably like in the middle point of my first semester doing this. And I, after that, was a wreck, like struggling with extreme mental fatigue and spiritual fatigue and emotional fatigue. And I was like, what is going on with me? Like, I didn't understand what was happening. And so I was meeting with my supervisor and another woman I meet with who is the Dean of Students' wife, Katie Anchetta. And they were like, well, you sound like you're burnt out. And then I started to think through, like, what I'd been doing that week. And I realized, like, oh, I have not been, like, giving time to the Lord. I've been giving time to these girls. I've been giving time to my internship. But I had not been giving time to the Lord. I hadn't even been inviting Him into the meetings I was having. And that was a very humbling and sobering moment for me, because I thought that, like, I was nailing it because I was, like, pouring into these girls, and, like, I totally wasn't, because God wasn't in it. Like, sure, He still could have used me, but I didn't I didn't invite Him into it. And so being humbled in that way was kind of intense, but then, like, so redeeming in the end, because the Lord so gently guided me into just inviting Him into every meeting, every conversation, which obviously means praying before. But even as a girl is coming to me with her problems, there has been a ridiculous amount of times where I'm, like, thinking to myself, like, Lord, I have absolutely no words for this girl, so please give me the words to say. And that just became a regular thing where it was like, even if I do have words to say, like, Lord, give me them, like, speak through me. And I would pray that even before, because I didn't want any girls to even get the idea that I think I know what I'm doing in my own strength, because I don't. And yeah, it got better. I started to get in the groove of things more, and it wasn't easy. It's a difficult job bearing the burdens of girls with them is very taxing. but also super rewarding because you get to minister to them and point them to the Lord and point them to Scripture. And yeah, I think that the Lord has ministered to me so, so heavily just through the women, because not only did I get to disciple and support them, but like there were so many times where like I would meet with a dorm steward and just be frank with them and tell them like I do not really have anything to give you right now. And they would pray for me, they would sit with me, they would hear what I'm dealing with. Um, and they ministered to me. The Lord definitely spoke through them to me so many times. And I was so blessed by them, and I've been so blessed by Kayla, my supervisor, and it's been a very good time that I've had here.
Yeah, definitely. So looking back over all that time, what are some of the best lessons that you've learned?
Like,
or I guess let me phrase it a different way. Think back to the successes that you've had with discipleship, with organizing musical events, with doing dorm meetings with the dorm stewards and other things like that. Think of the successes that you've had in those things and tell me about it.
Oh, these successes. Okay. Well, I don't know if I've done enough like worship ministry to have like seen any successes, I guess, that have stuck with me. I mean, obviously the Lord like in any time could do that, and I don't know. So specifically for like worship ministry, I'm not really sure, but like as a dorm steward, I think a big thing was like just seeing like the Lord work in some of these girls' lives, like watching the gears turn in their mind as they start to realize God's character more. I think that obviously, like all I would do is sit and listen and point them to the Lord, and there were times where like I would just be able to watch the Lord like shepherd them right in front of me, which was a huge blessing because like I said, like it's absolutely impossible for me to do it in my own strength, and that's going to fail. And so I think those were always big successes. I don't think I can think of like a specific scenario right now, but it's definitely something I remember experiencing is just like watching the Lord minister to the women I was a dorm steward over, like right in front of me was always a huge blessing, and watching them grow over the 4 months that I got to steward them. And yeah, for that, definitely that's how it was for dorm stewarding. And successes that I got to see, like some that really stuck out to me in my internship here at the Bible college is after I had shared my testimony to a group of girls. I'd shared my testimony a few times to girls, and every time like someone would come to me and like be sharing something with me that like I don't think they had actually ever shared with anyone before, or they like very much wanted to keep it to themselves or weren't sure if they were even able to talk about it. And so watching the Lord like redeem a like my life in sin for his glory to minister to these girls now is like that was such a blessing. And yeah, I think that was like the biggest thing that like blessed me so much is like seeing like, because that was another time that the Lord was actively working in their minds and in their hearts right in front of my eyes. Yeah, that is so awesome to experience. And um, as I was in Austria, I think the biggest success I had was just the Lord ministering to me, I think, because I genuinely didn't think I would get through being there. It was a hard season, but God really revealed His faithfulness to me in that time, even through trials. So.
Yeah. Now, tell me about some of the hard seasons. Tell me some of the failures that you've been able to go through, or you've been able to learn lessons.
Okay. Um, well,
I mean, even starting out with Austria. Tell me about that.
okay, yeah. That's good. Well, being in Austria, I think there was a lot of times that, like, being in, it was specifically dealing with difficult people, I found myself, like, really struggling to actively love them in that moment. Yeah, I think that I definitely could have reflected Christ better in those times, and um, learning that we, like, Christ's love for us and for the world, it surpasses how they're like how he was treated and how they treated him. And I think that was, like, very humbling for me, because I didn't learn that till after I had been there, that, like, we're expected to love in that way. And I guess I always assumed that it was too extreme for me to ever accomplish that, which of course we can never meet, like, that same level that Christ loved, because he was God. He is God and he's perfect. And um, but because of that, I was like, well, that's not going to happen for me ever. I think I just didn't even hold myself to any standard on that level. And so, um, yeah, frustrating people and people who are, at times just outwardly disrespectful, it can be difficult to love. And I definitely could have loved the people there better. And I think that, I guess that was a big one. There were some very difficult people, and in the end, I think that another thing is, like, I did struggle being there, but I could have, like, let the Lord give me more joy. I think I sat in my own misery for too long, and I could have enjoyed it more if I had let myself and let the Lord, like, ministered to me in that way. Like, yeah, I found joy in him, I found comfort in him, but he definitely, like, wants to give us the grace to enjoy, like, what we're doing and where he's placed us. And yeah, I think that in my selfishness, in my desire to complain and in need, like, in the need for comfort, I could have, I limited what God wanted to do for me, because of course he can do anything, but I didn't even invite him into that. I just let myself be more miserable than I think I could have been. So yeah, those were two big things I learned after being in Austria. So.
Definitely. So, as the Dean of Women intern, right? What does discipleship look like to you? I mean, what is good discipleship? What's an example of poor discipleship?
Well, I mean, we are, like, as we're all called to be disciples, in the Great Commission, like you said. And I think that discipleship isn't just a position to have, it isn't just a circumstance. I think that we're commissioned to have that as a lifestyle as followers of Christ. And now I was blessed to have it be my job, not a job that paid me, but, something I was responsible over. And I think that it means continuing and walking in